Willkommen in einem Fragens video. Welcome to another exciting video, in this case episode 9 of my figure gaming video series. In this video I'll cover how to create historical playing areas using standard terrain pieces, which most players would, I would assume, possess. Before we cover the use of commonly available terrain to represent historical battlefields, I'll cover the creation of custom terrain pieces. When I use this term, I mean terrain pieces which have been specifically created to mimic the actual terrain on a specific battlefield, which means it has potentially little value for other types of game. This is my template for the Battle of Marengo based on an SPI board game. The large hill on the right is actually not historically correct. In reality, there were 4 or 5 hills which occupied this place with a flat cultivated section in the centre. SPI decided to make this a single hill to ensure the Austrians could not use these hills to assist in defence against the French, a game balance thing. In the SPI game, the biggest issue the designers had was the recreation of the French counterattack. The final result was a special French counterattack rule and the removal of any useful terrain for the Austrians to use, which worked if the Austrians attacked as they did historically, but instead they would simply never go onto the open plains to be destroyed by the French and stayed on the left of the playing area, safely behind some form of defences. There is a lesson to be learned here. If you use a special rule to solve a problem, you will almost always create other unexpected problems. Always get the basics right, and then you don't need special rules. This shows my custom terrain on the right. I have many different terrain systems, but in this case I'm using a 3x4 foot playing area tray with standard road networks. On top of this I place the custom terrain, which for this battle consists of a very large hill at the top and the water feature in the bottom left corner. Other historical playing areas require me to create a full 3x4 foot custom made playing area. In both cases I end up with a garage full of custom terrain which I only use a few times and then never again. This works and gives you a nice playing area, but is not really practical in the long term. Just as an FYI, the large hill was a separate terrain piece, shown here, felt bottom so it would stay firmly on my playing area, and was in 2 parts to reduce storage issues. While it's possible I may use this for other games, it's probably unlikely. The other main piece of custom terrain was the water features, which occupied the left flank of the attacker's player's edge. Once you've added the other terrain, such as woods, built-up areas and some hills, it looks rather good and is a joy to play on, but it's not very useful for any other game, which is not a recreation of Marengo. The other issues I had was the edges of the terrain pieces. Placing terrain features on top of other features results in edges, as you can see on the left. While I must admit this is not a major issue when playing a game, but is another factor to consider, and you need to limit the number of special terrain pieces, otherwise you end up with a rather messy playing area. The final issue, or actually in my case the most important issue, is storage. I've broken this up into 3 pieces to assist with storage, but it's still an issue, and I'm certain once I've completed a few games, this will end up in my basement, only to be seen again after archaeologists do a dig at my home in the far future. While using custom-made terrain may look nice, a better solution is to use standard building block terrain pieces, which is what I'll be covering from this point on. The first step is the basic playing area. I use a 3x4 foot MDF tray, which has a standard road network built into it. This shows the short axis network on the left and the long axis network on the right. The X and S's are not embedded into the playing area and are simply there to show where objectives for victory conditions are to be placed. Players could create whatever road network they wished, or even bypass any road network. I use a road network because it helps me position objectives and entry and exit points. Players can elect to do whatever solution suits them. But after a lot of testing, I've found this kind of road network, particularly the one on the left, works in most cases. Players could alternatively use flexible roads, such as these pieces of felt. I used to use felt roads many years ago when my playing area was felt, but I found the roads creased and twisted and looked horrible, so I stopped using them. I've discovered that with my turf-covered playing areas, the felt stays firmly on the turf surface, the turf surface, and all the bends and creases tend to disappear, as you can see here. I may consider going back to a felt road system, but only if forced. Of course, one of the issues with felt roads is the edges, and particularly when you get close up to it, the embedded roads you can see here use a house paint to give it the colour, which I've now replaced with a specific woodlands terrain paint, which does look a lot better than this, but even so I feel the embedded roads tend to look nicer than, let's say, felt. In the most part, roads are used to cross water features or to bypass other terrain. You only need a road in those locations. Over a water feature, I use a bridge or forward terrain piece. And as for bypassing other terrain, I use my trusty old felt roads for these short stretches. Thus, you could avoid dealing with the road issue entirely in your standard playing area, if you so desire. Now we come to streams. My old system used standard stream terrain pieces, which are placed on the standard playing area, as you can see here. The roads you see here match up with the roads on the playing area, and incidentally uses the woodland brown, which I think looks better than my original soil house paint. This shows the streams on my playing area. One point which I realised after creating them was it becomes a major issue matching them up with the roads. If you spend enough time and effort, you can work out where they're supposed to go, but when you start setting up a game, you don't want to spend too much time solving a puzzle. Another reason why the felt stream system may be optimal, or actually what I do these days is I embed the streams in the playing area, so that I avoid this entirely. But nonetheless, there is a problem with these separate stream playing areas. Unfortunately, I, in the end, considered this system a failure and almost never use these terrain pieces. The other option is to use pieces of felt, which on a turf-covered playing area sticks to the playing area as if glued. This is a good solution as it does give you maximum flexibility, and I'd recommend new players to focus on felt-based terrain systems as it's cheap and easy to make. Although I have to admit, these days I embed the streams in my standard playing area, so I avoid the whole thing entirely. Using the felt stream system, the edges are still very annoying. I will order some latex streams to see if it gives me a better solution, but I can live with this if required. One solution I've been thinking of is to use rubber sealer to create my rivers. The US has a product called Flex Paste, which when dry forms what looks like rubber. It comes in black and white. I could mix blue paint in with a white Flex Paste. As I do not live in the US, I may need to find equivalent where I live. Another solution I was told to try was to use pool liners, but so far I have not found any which are suitable, but I'll keep on looking. The final water feature that I need to reproduce is the river. This is a corner piece which fits neatly in my standard playing area. You could certainly use a thicker piece of felt to represent the river if you wish to achieve the same effect. This shows how the corner piece can be used on my standard playing area. As long as you don't care about covering roads, you can place this in any of the four corners in 2 different ways per corner. While my streams were a failure, I do occasionally use this terrain piece. After a lot of experimentation, I discovered my built-up areas are simple. Basically a 4 centimetre square building block, which is a base, which can be arranged in any manner you wish. In my case, felt-based, so it sticks to my playing area, and topped off by a removable building, so it looks good when there are no troops defending the built-up area. When troops occupy the built-up area, you remove the building, but the location of the built-up area remains static as your troops fight over it. The other area terrain pieces are also reasonably simply dealt with. For simplicity, for Napoleonics, I'm using a standard size of 6 centimetres by 10 to 12 centimetres for all area terrain such as hills, woods, lakes or swamps. A better way of actually depicting this is that all my standard terrain pieces are 1 base width wide by 2 to 3 base widths deep with a half a centimetre lip running around the corner, and this pretty much works with any kind of base list. For World War II Cold War, because the bases are smaller, I typically use a standard size of 5 centimetres wide by 8 to 10 centimetres long. Again, for all area terrain such as hills, woods, lakes or swamps. The standard size are based on element widths, and I do mix and match the terrain pieces occasionally. However, players can use any size they wish. This shows a 12 centimetre square woods. However, I tend to find 6 by 10 to 12 centimetres or 5 by 8 to 10 centimetres, depending on the base width of the elements you're using, gives me the greatest flexibility when attempting to recreate historical battles. Using these building blocks, I'll now attempt to recreate a range of historical battlefields. Let's start with Marengo. This shows the position about 7 AM, with the Austrians only beginning their crossing of the major river and the French scattered around. The French, in this case, were totally surprised. This is the Marengo playing area, showing the water feature section. The Austrians on the right, behind the red dotted line. The waterways are all felt, and the main river being light blue, and the streams are darker blue. I've added a small road made from felt as well, which lines up with the default road network. This is not 100% accurate, but gives me a playing area which resembles the Marengo battlefield closely enough to have a game, with no custom terrain features being used. Using this system, I can reproduce every one of the 14 SPI playing areas, as well as a few new ones. I am also covering other battles, or creating scenarios for those other battles as well. This works, and works rather well, and all these terrain pieces can be used for pretty much any of the battlefields. I can't say that this is as good as the custom terrain solution. The river edges don't look so good, and when there is fighting on the streams can be moved by accident. I'm really thinking long and hard about latex rivers, and will purchase some, but in the meantime this works. Incidentally, the light blue colour was a test. I used up all my dark blue felt and only had this. I will redo the rivers in a darker blue. While the felt does seem to stick on my my flock turf covered terrain, it still does lift, as you can see here. Your terrain does need to allow for the felt to stick to it, otherwise you'll not be able to do curves very well. I found a felt top playing area does not give you enough sticking power, but you can get by if required. This shows another example of lifting felt. The felt will form curves well enough, but unless you iron the roads before play, this will occur. I suspect I could carry a travel iron with me to the clubs I play in. However, if I bring it out, someone may think I'm a highly domesticated married man who is about to iron my t-shirt, and I would not wish that, would I? Wait a minute, I just need to make sure the toilet seat is down before I continue with this video. Let's look at another battle, also in 1800. In this case, we have the Battle of Hohenlinden. This shows the playing area. The French are at the top and the Austrians at the bottom. This shows a standard playing area for the same battle. From the perspective of the French player, the Austrians enter from the top. Unfortunately, in this picture, the player edges have been swapped. But apart from some minor issues, is a reasonable playing area to reproduce this battle. This shows the position of both sides. The long French bar represents the three objective towns which they need to hold, and the French outflanking forces on the right. The Austrian main column is in the centre, and the other columns on the left and in other locations. The Austrians have two corps trailing behind, as you can see, entering the playing area. This is a situation about 9 AM in the morning. This shows the effect I was referring to, or how important movement was. It was all about getting the most where it was needed as quickly as possible. Two roads were all weather roads, so the movement of two columns were rapid. The other two roads were not all weather roads, and the movement was slow. This had a major impact on the actual battle. The French counterattack forces is shown on the left. The French defensive line is in clear terrain, but it's based on three towns, and there were French forces in the forest in front of the position. At this point, the Austrians had pushed them out of the forest, but when the Austrians left the forest, they were hit with a French counterattack. This shows my deployment sheet, which I use for my scenario, and it outlines the elements in each different location. Unfortunately, you can't see it in any great detail. This comes from my scenario PDF for the board game to figure game conversion. Let's now look at Austerlitz. The playing area here is rather busy with lots of streams. The Russians attacked down the right of the screen, where it was met by French reinforcements arriving off the right edge. Napoleon launched his major offensive in the centre left of the screen. I personally think this is the worst of all the SPI maps. I'm really tempted to create my own map, but anyway, I can convert this into a figure gaming format nonetheless. This shows the battlefield from the aspects of the Allies. The hills running across gives the Allies a strong position. but when they decided to attack the French on the left, they exposed themselves. This shows the playing area from the aspect of the left, or the French. In this playing area, the roads have no real effect. This is my deployment sheet from my PDF scenario book for those interested. This shows the deployment before the Allied attack began. The French forces in a line at the bottom right can be placed anywhere behind the red dotted line. In this game, this is a secret and only revealed on a later game turn. As much as possible, elements try and use terrain features to improve their defensive capability. Let's now look at the Battle of Eylau. What we see here is the battlefield. The river is shown here, but it is frozen, so it has no impact. The main feature in this battle is the town in the centre, as well as a few of the hills. This shows the Eylau playing area using standard playing area pieces. The French are deployed on the left, and the Russians on the right, behind the red dotted line. This once again shows the deployment sheet for the Battle of Eylau. This shows the deployment of both armies in the afternoon on the 7th, with the main battle occurring on the 8th. We're now going to be moving on to Deutsche Wagram. This shows the battlefield in a playing area format. The number of roads are so great I normally do not deploy them and assume there is a road wherever I wish it to be. The only real bottlenecks are bridges, which I do take note of. This shows the playing area from the French side at Wagram. The Austrian front line is at the start of the battle is shown as a red dotted line. Historically, the Austrians advanced on their right and pulled back on their left before launching an attack on their left. This shows the deployment sheet from the Austrian player edge. At this stage of the battle, the French have crossed the river and are moving into their attack position, with the Austrians beginning to react. This battle spanned more than a single day, but the first day was mainly both armies forming up. The one downside of playing areas this large is that there is a lot of movement required with minimal combat. You could start the battle on the second day with both armies ready in position in order to shorten the game. This would work in this particular battle. Let's now move on to Borodino. The river, which in the rules cannot be crossed without a bridge, has so many bridges on it, I wonder why they even included it. I suspect most are fords. The fortifications are marked with a dark dot. The bulk of the battle occurred in the lower half of the screen. This shows the Borodino playing area, with the Russians on the left and the French on the right. The dotted red line represents the Russian front line. Two of the built-up areas are the artillery fortifications. This shows the deployment sheet for my scenario. At this stage of the Battle of Borodino, here we see the French coming in contact with the Russians. The game consists of a scenario where the French are not on the playing area and move on to the play map and deploy. This was to give the French more operational options, but also allowed the Russians to counter it. As with Wagram, players could do this or simply start from the historical battle start positions. While I'll be the first to admit many of the playing areas shown in this video are not an exact representation of the actual battlefield playing area, in the most they are close enough to give you a good game, or at least give you a good feel for the battle that's been reproduced. And so this concludes my part 9 of my figure gaming video series, in this case how to create realistic Napoleonic terrain to allow you to refight an entire battle using standard area terrain pieces. Alle guten Dinge, kommen zu einem Ende.